Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast, hosted by the Fantasyholics Podcast Network. Once again, coming at you live on the Fantasyholics Podcast YouTube channel. Brant, I know it's good to be back every Monday doing these live videos here, but this one's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little special, a little more near and dear to you and I's heart, if you will. We have a longtime fan, a faithful listener, reached out and requested us to do something a little different on today's episode. So we're going to give that a whirl. Jennifer DeHart Sons, she was there with us every week, Brant, on the live start sits, a woman of our heart, consistently coming in and asking us what we had on the menu for the week. Definitely knew how to get you and I's attention and get her question answered. So, when she reached out, messaged our Facebook page, and said that she wanted to hear how to break down a startup. How do you things you do and things you don't do, what to avoid when you're doing a dynasty startup draft. It just felt natural that we bring that here and do that for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jennifer, if you reach out to us on our Facebook page, on the Fatboyz page, send us some of your information, and we'll get a Fatboyz Dynasty or a Fantasyholics podcast shirt sent out to you with the good old Fatboyz logo on the back there. A good friend of mine made them for the draft. I have a few extras that didn't quite fit this fat boy, so definitely get them sent out to you, or sent one out your way. Just reach out to us, and anyone else that's listening, don't hesitate. Reach out to our Fatboyz Facebook page or the Fantasyholics page if you got something you want to hear about on these live podcasts. This one was one that we kind of I think we hit on it a couple of years ago when we first started doing our cast, and kind of avoided it again because we did our startup that year. But it's definitely a good one to get into and talk about, and especially during this downtime right now. A lot of people are starting up dynasty leagues or even prepping for your draft. So this we're going to roll it in. Mainly it's going to be how to, do's and don'ts of dynasty, but I'm sure we'll roll in some do's and don'ts of redraft in here as well. If you need IDP, don't hesitate to reach out over there on the Fantasyholics page. Give our IDP podcast a listen. He does wonders over there.
Yeah, Brant, in addition to that, anybody else who's interested in potentially being a lucky recipient of a Fantasyholics Podcast Network T-shirt with the Fatboyz logo on the back, I know you have another one, Brant. We could always get a couple more potentially too, but let's just put it out there. Let's do a contest like the Fantasyholics Facebook or YouTube page. Send us a screenshot or a picture of your computer showing that you subscribe to the Fantasyholics Podcast YouTube channel, to either the Fantasyholics page, Facebook page, and put the hashtag Fatboyz in there, or send it to the Fatboyz Facebook page. And we'll give it a couple weeks, and we'll do a giveaway, and somebody else aside from Jennifer will also be lucky enough to wear a Fatboyz Dynasty Podcast T-shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. I got two that don't quite fit my big body, so we'll definitely get those two out there.
10-4. All right, so let's get into this, Brant. So, for those that have never done a dynasty draft before, it can be an intimidating task. There's a lot of question marks, right? Like, where do I take this player because his age is getting up there? Where do I value this rookie pick at? There's a lot of question marks, excuse me, that are a little different for the dynasty community than what they are for the redraft community. Because if you mess up a draft and a redraft, it's 1 year, no big deal. I'll do more research. I'll hit them harder next year. In a dynasty, if you mess up in that initial draft, it could take years to rebuild. And it's definitely a grind going through that rebuild process as it is anyway.
Yeah, it definitely is. And in a dynasty league, you have to know that eventually you're going to go through a rebuild. Now, the question is, when I started this up, when we started up our dynasty home league, I went into it treating it like a redraft, and it wasn't even 3 weeks later that I was already starting to realize some do's and don'ts that I should have been following when we did it. Kenny Galladay in the 5th or 6th round, but we don't need to talk about that quite yet. I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure we'll hit that eventually. But one of the biggest things that you have to know is know your scoring. Know your league scoring. That's the biggest thing. Make sure you study that. Study that right off the bat. Is the receivers the prime? Is it PPR? Is it tight end premium, super flex? Do the wide receivers get bonus points for so many yards? Or the running backs get bonus points for touches? So make sure you study those rules and you know those rules very, very well, because you look at a rule like Derrick Henry in the first round. I know he's 29 years old, but if you're getting points per carry, the man's almost guaranteed 20 plus carries a week. So you're going to get, 20 plus whatever the point is. So, and in my mind, he would move up ahead of a few other backs like a Kenneth Walker that is in a split backfield, even though he's younger, but he's only going to see 10 to 12 carries a week potentially. So you got to really know your scoring, because some when you get into the scoring, sometimes that the movement of your own rankings are going to change.
Yeah, and so Brant, I think that goes right along with my first take here, and that's do your research and have a plan of attack walking in on draft day. All right, don't be one of those people that's like, I'll just wait and see what the draft board looks like in the 7th round, and not knowing a single name on the board, not knowing where value is. I know what you and I do, Brant, may not be for everybody as far as coming in with a cheat sheet where we like what guy and what round. But at the same time, you got to do your research, and it feeds right into what Brant's saying. If it's a wide receiver premium, you get extra points for wide receivers, then, so be it. You got to have those wide receiver rankings a little bit higher than where you would maybe in a non wide receiver factored league, or if it's point per carry, obviously you adjust according to that, and you draft those running backs a little higher. Same thing goes with super flex. Obviously in a super flex league, that premium of the quarterback position is going to be a little bit higher than that of in a non super flex.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes into your super flex and stuff like that, quarterbacks are always going to go higher in the super flex leagues, regardless of how the scoring really is. Most people are going to value your quarterbacks because, well, most quarterbacks are going to hang 25, 30 points a week. So quarterbacks are normally going to fly off the board a lot quicker in super flex leagues. And that leads me right into what we'll talk about your rookie. If you're doing a dynasty and you talked about research, start your research on your rookies early. If you're not a college football watcher, make sure you tune into some of those games that are on there. Make sure you go out and you're already starting to research rookies throughout the year. And that's going to roll me right into one of my other things is don't move your rookie picks so quick. So many people get into their first dynasty and like, this rookie pick means nothing. Don't move your rookie pick so quick. The rookie picks, as the season goes on, their values really go up. Because if you're competing, that first round rookie pick could turn into a CMC if that team's not competing, if they just hit a whole bunch of injuries and CMC's having a great year, or Henry or any of those guys are hitting on good years, that could turn you into a championship competitor. Don't move them rookie picks too early. And if you're right there at the middle of the road, hold on to them rookie picks, because they'll be valued later on, especially during the offseason.
Yeah, so for me, when it comes to rookie picks, the one thing I want to say about those is I agree with you, Brant, that you don't want to move them too early necessarily, but second round picks and later, in my mind, they're very, very movable assets. Rarely do we see second round picks hit. You can go back a few years ago and see guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown going in the second round, Kadarius Toney, which we still don't really know if that's a hit yet or not. But year in and year out, second round picks are more dart throws. So if there's somebody in your dynasty league who values those rookie picks and think those are gold, and you can send a second round pick or a third round pick, depending on how many rounds you do in your rookie draft, for an established veteran player that can help you compete now, it's definitely worth doing. Now, again, however, those first round picks, they do carry a little bit more value, a little bit more merit. It's a little easier to hit a player that's going to immediately impact your roster and not just dart throws. This year's rookie class is a prime example of once you get out of the first round, it's very murky. I know this isn't a class that any of us are particularly in love with, but this is definitely a draft class where those second, third round picks are pretty easy to move, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so go ahead, Brant.
Oh, absolutely, and that brings me into your taxis. Know about your taxi spots. Know how long they can stay on a taxi. Your second, third round picks may not impact right away. So make sure you know how that taxi is. I know in one of our leagues, it's 1 year they stay on the taxi. In another one of our leagues, it's 2-year players get to stay on the taxi. But make sure you pay attention to your taxi system too.
Yeah. All right. So getting back into the actual draft itself, I think it's important, Brant, and I know you and I have learned this the hard way. Um, Maintain a healthy balance of age on your roster. If you go in your dynasty draft and you say, man, the average life of dynasty leagues is only 2 to 3 years anyway, I want to win while their money is there, why it's guaranteed this league exists, and you go draft a bunch of guys that are like 27 years old at the running back position and a bunch of 31-year-old wide receivers, and then next thing you know, that league's going on year 4, you're probably sitting in a pretty rough spot, whereas the rest of your teammate or league mates are probably much healthier. Now, it may be okay if you won that league, your first or second year in the league, but if you didn't, you might be pretty sour. I know, Brant, you and I, when we first did our first dynasty draft years ago now, it was a thing. Like, what, I mean, CEH went in the first round of our startup in our home league, just because the age was there, the draft capital, whatever. But it's a prime example that you can't go too young, because you don't want to, you want proven talent that exists, that you know what it is, but you got to have those younger guys to hopefully step up and replace those aging vets. Obviously this year, if you drafted a guy like Derrick Henry, you'd be happy with what Derrick Henry is going to do this year probably, but it'd be really nice to be able to get like a Jahmyr Gibbs to slot into that Derrick Henry spot in the years moving past after Henry hangs it up, steps down, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, when it comes to startup, think about how you want to attack. Do you want to attack, year like you said? Do you want to win year 1 and 2? Do you want to attack it like that, or do you want to punt that first year and just start building the young crew? Make sure you have that plan of attack going into the draft, because if you want to, go hard, we had a guy in our home league that went hardcore into trying to win this first year, and he had a lot of injuries. He ended up going almost straight into rebuild. I thought I was going to compete my first year, and Kenny Galladay, we'll just leave it at that. It wasn't very good for me. So make sure you go in and you know what your attack is. Or do you want to just come straight out of the gate and shoot for the moon and go for the win the first year and maybe start your rebuild the following year? Or do you want that balance? I always say get that balance. Make sure you have some youth. Youth will probably go a lot sooner than you expect in dynasty leagues, because some people are going to attack it a whole lot differently. Like you said, CEH went first round. Let's see who else was in that draft that went very early. Keyshawn Vaughn went extremely early in that draft. So a lot of young talent went way too early in my mind.
Well, you said CEH and Keyshawn Vaughn and young talent in the same sentence. I don't know if that was intentional. Maybe wasted young talent or lack of talent, but
what people
young
thought
was
going to be the comeback. My biggest thing is whenever you start your dynasty, make sure you grab that handcuff. Make sure you grab your running back's handcuff. That could be the biggest thing from you competing and continuing to compete that year. Prime example, if you got Mixon in our startup, you wanted Samaje because you knew that was his instant handcuff. In our startup, you got Cook, you wanted to go get Madison. So make sure you handcuff your running backs.
And that too really, Brant, depends on the size of your bench. I'm in a dynasty league that is very shallow benches and you can't handcuff. But that's the one benefit of a dynasty league, I guess, because you can't handcuff a player. One, if you have the number 1 waiver claim, it's really great. And number 2, it's a dynasty league. So if my stud goes down and I'm out, there's always next year.
Mm-hmm.
But that bench is very, very shallow. So in that one particular league, it's not possible. So staying with the draft here for me, I got one more thing to stay with the draft at this point. So even in whether it be a super flex, tight end premium, or just a straight up PPR dynasty league, some positions are worth paying a premium for in dynasty. And what I mean by that is, so let's say you're drafting this year, Brant. Where do you think in a non-super flex league, where do you think a guy like Jalen Hurts goes?
A guy like Jalen Hurts, he just re-signed with Philly. He's there going to be long term. In a non-super flex league, you may want to jump and get him in the earlier rounds. I know a lot of people say wait for quarterbacks, but at a dynasty, Jalen Hurts is just signed his extension. He's staying with Philly. Philly's built that offense around. So you're talking Jalen Hurts is one of the top 3 quarterbacks off the board in my mind, because where he's going to be. Well, maybe top 4, but either way, you know where he's going to be. So you're probably looking at him in probably the 5th or 6th round, about right where you should start thinking about quarterbacks. And that brings me to a point. Go ahead.
Well, hang on, Brant. So that's what I was getting at with this is a young quarterback like Jalen Hurts. Patrick Mahomes is another one that comes to mind, Joe Burrow. But you get those guys that are ahead of the curve. There's a drop off between a top 5 quarterback and a guy that's just maybe every other week as a top 10 quarterback. Whereas the rest of your league mates may be grabbing, and stacking their 3rd, 4th, 5th running back. Same thing with their wide receiver pool. If you can go in and grab that quarterback at that point, that's going to solidify your roster for the near, foreseeable future. Like if you got Patrick Mahomes right now in a dynasty league, you're not worried about quarterback for the next, decade, probably still at this point, with any luck. And so that why everybody else is worried about how do I replace a guy like Kirk Cousins as he's getting older, or as Jumbo just said, Daniel Jones here. Why everybody else is worried about replacing that at the quarterback position. You're sitting with Patrick Mahomes and you're healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to be a leader of that pack. You want to be the first one to jump on the quarterbacks or the wide receivers. You don't want to follow that trend. You don't want to be the last guy, and you don't want to be the caboose picking up the scraps that are left on there. You always want to be a leader when it starts the runs. You see it every year in redraft, dynasty, keeper leagues, all those leagues. You always see a trend happen. Well, always find that trend, and you want to be the leader of that trend. You want to start the quarterbacks. You want to start the wide receivers or the tight ends. And you talk about taking a premium guy. Tight ends is almost worth paying up for in dynasty leagues as well. You get a guy, I understand Travis Kelce's getting up there in age, but the man is still hanging 20-plus points a week. Not many tight ends are almost guaranteed that almost every week. So paying a premium for, Travis Kelce, or I still put Kittle there because when he is healthy, he does hang those points. But that's where you want to look at it. Paying a premium for a tight end probably isn't bad. If you miss out on one of those other guys, just remember it always takes a tight end a year or 2 to really catch on in the NFL.
Yeah, I almost think Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts are probably both ahead of Kittle at this point, just due to age and what they've got going in front of them here. Sorry, everybody, got a wicked cough coming on here all of a sudden. Anyway, so another thing, Brant, this is where I may poke some Kenny Golladay jokes in here. Another thing I have is don't fall so in love with one player that you either must reach to guarantee you get said player, or that you miss out on player and you feel as if your whole draft was a waste. I know I've gone into drafts where it's like I've got to have player X, I've got to have player Y, and I'm going to reach to get said player. You can't go in with that mindset because you may miss out on other value to overdraft one of these guys. And again, I know you had this issue happen in the past. You wanted a guy at the draft, you didn't get him, and you paid a big draft price or trade price to get the player, and it worked out for you well long term in that one instance. If we're thinking of the same thing here, but you don't want your draft to feel like it's a success all based on one thing. So you've got to be fluid. You've got to be able to adapt and overcome to that.
Yeah, I'm assuming we're both talking about Joe Burrow here. I wanted Joe Burrow. I didn't want to leave our rookie draft or our startup without him, and I left our startup without him, but I don't think I went to bed without him. But I definitely did pay a premium to go get him. But absolutely, don't fall in love with a guy. If you miss out on a guy, you miss out on a guy. Just remember, he could be a one-hit wonder, and that could end up being the greatest thing, the greatest advantage that you did miss out. Or he could end up hurt and banged up and miss that whole year. And then who you got in replacement could be the better thing. Go in there with the tier list. Rank your guys. Put them in the tiers. Make sure you stick to your tier list. I screwed that up in our last rookie draft. And Finley right now is reaping the rewards of my mess up right now. He is the proud owner of Garrett Wilson, and I just passed on him just trying to for a guy that I watched film on just a few days prior to and fell in love with. And that's it's hard not to do, especially with the young players coming out. But don't fall in love with the guys. Get your tier list, get your rankings, and stick to them whenever you go. Trust your gut, trust your research.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring up the fact that Garrett Wilson was a second-round rookie pick in our home league. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, he shouldn't have been. He should have been the 5th overall, but I screwed that pooch.
I appreciate you. So moving right along here, another thing that I think you want to avoid doing when you walk into a dynasty draft is don't think of the team you drafted after your draft is complete as your forever team. Constantly do player evaluations and be willing to move on from a player regardless of where your draft capital is on that player. Prime example of that, in 2019 in startup rankings, Michael Thomas and Melvin Gordon were both top 10 players in that draft. And both of those now hold very little value. Brent, I know you were a guy who fell on the Michael Thomas sword. Could have been any of us because it was out of nowhere. Here he is, wide receiver number 1 to non-existent almost right thereafter. But that's Michael Thomas is a prime value or prime player name to talk about when it comes to, maybe this is a player you said you had to get at your draft. You got him where the value was right. And now the value's changed, but you got to be willing to move ahead of them, get ahead of that curve when there's that fall off, get off that ship before it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Much similarly to what you did with Kenny Golladay, Brant. I know you took him high. It was always that, well, he's going to live up to that eventually. And then it was I don't want to let him go because as soon as I do, he's going to hit and somebody else is going to pick him. And he clogged your roster up for quite a while there.
I think about the last week or two of last year was when I finally had to cut ties with that young man, and now only Lord knows what he's going to do. But you're right. Don't right now I have a guy on my roster that I still have high hopes for in Bateman, and I mean he's young enough that I can hold on to a little bit longer. But be willing to move on. Be willing to move on. Another thing with when you're drafting is guys like Javonte Williams. Guys that are going to be slipping because of their injury, don't hesitate to take them late, especially if they start out on the pup. You got an IR list for a reason. Go out there, look for the guys that may be, hurt. Javonte Williams is the first name that comes to my mind. He's going to slip in a lot of drafts. He's going to slip in a lot of dynasty drafts. And really, there's a whole lot in front of him. Yes, there is Samaje P. Ryan, who's been very serviceable. But when Javonte comes back, and it may be a whole year before he's back to 100%, if he ever gets there. But guess what? You get a young, 22? I don't have it pulled up right now, 22, 23, and he comes back and lives up to where he's, what he was supposed to do in Denver. You got a guy in the later rounds of picks. So when you get in those later rounds, don't hesitate to reach. Skip on your defense, maybe. Just skip on your defense and pick a guy that's going to go straight to your IR. And then, grab your defense off the waivers. But don't hesitate to look for those guys that are going to be banged up a little bit that could come in and make instant impact. Jamison Williams is another guy. He's suspended, 6 weeks? He's probably going to slip in a lot of drafts. He's 21, 22 years old on a great high-powered offense that's moving forward. I don't think that he'll ever live up to where his draft capital was in the NFL of a first rounder, but he does have that potential to be a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 guy. So make sure you're looking for that value late in drafts.
Yeah, and those kind of players that you just mentioned, Brant, whether it be a Javonte Williams or a Jamison Williams, those are a little bit more of the dart throws that we like to see, just because there's a little bit more sustainability and a little bit more chance of those guys hitting. Another one would be a guy like Calvin Ridley, who now at this point he's probably skyrocketed back up in ADP. But if you did a dynasty startup draft last year, you were probably able to get him like darn near for free, for cheap, for not a normal price tag on him at all. And now you're sitting there staring down a guy who could come out and have 1,000 yards receiving this year and be Trevor Lawrence's number 1 guy. So there's a difference between an uneducated dart throw late and an educated dart throw in these drafts. And again, they're dart throws for a reason. They may not hit, they may hit, but at the same time, if you're taking an educated dart throw, because it's a guy you've done your research on, he's coming in, whether it be a free agent move or, a rookie or whatever, but there's vacated targets in the offense and they got to go somewhere. That's a great spot to look at adding one of these guys as a dart throw.
Yeah, and also whenever you're in a draft, this is another do before we jump into our don'ts. So make sure you check out some contract situations. Make sure is this guy going to be on this team for a couple years, or is he going to be on this team and they have almost a free cut to him? Make sure you like Leonard Fournette 2 years ago. He signed 3-year deal with 2 or 3 year deal with Tampa Bay. But he had a dead cap hit almost after this year. So they were able to cut him free of charge. So let somebody else die on that sword if an older back like that has dead cap. Cook right now is one of the prime examples. You're not sure what's going to happen with Cook there in Minnesota. So I'm drawing blanks on teams. You can't stop coughing, boy. This is a fun one. But yeah, make sure you check out some contract situations too. Prime example is Seattle. Both of those backs are tied together for at least the next 3 years because of where they are. So that they're going to be in a run first backfield. It's good. Those are two good players to hold. Both of their ADPs are sliding due to the fact of where they went. So make sure you do know how long is this player going to be on this team? Because if Cook ends up in, I don't know, if Dalvin Cook ends up in Tennessee, he has no value. So you know what I mean? So make sure you do your research and check out some contract situations. Also, make sure you pay attention to that free agency during the offseason too and how long they sign them for. Christian Kirk was a guy that skyrocketed last year because of the price they paid. And it did pay off for 1 year, but then like you said, Ridley's probably going to take over a lot of those targets this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Brant. So again, I've got through all my do's and don'ts of this. If you have some more don'ts, that we'll hear those in a second. But I think it goes back to the biggest thing with a dynasty is, like Brant alluded to, you've got to know your league settings. You've got to have a decent feel for the guys you're playing with in your league, and you have to do your research and have that when you walk into the draft and just know, this is my game plan. I'm going to stick to it the best I can, but I'm not going to be so gung-ho on my game plan that if other players slip that I have rated above where my game plan is, I have to scoop up that value.
Yeah, I'm wrapped up on do's and don'ts as well. But it's like you said, you rank your players, you do your research, trust yourself. Trust what you listen to, trust who you follow. Know that you're going in with that game plan and make sure that you have a good feel for it and do your best to stick to it. Don't fall in love. Don't go, I got to leave this draft with so-and-so. Don't let that screw up your whole draft. Another thing is don't let some goofball that maybe it's his first year draft and screw up your whole draft where you just throw your papers up in the air and cause a nice scene at the decent establishment that you went to because you're a little upset and it threw you off the game quite a bit. Don't let that happen to you either. Make sure you keep your composure whenever you're in a draft.
Absolutely. So I think that covers this week's episode, and a little bit shorter one, some dynasty startup draft do's and don'ts. Again, Jennifer, thank you for suggesting that we do this and wanting to hear our opinion. Again, message us on either of the 2 pages. Send us your address. We'll get that shirt out to you. And again, anybody else who's interested in getting that shirt, send us a picture, a screenshot of you subscribing to the Fantasy Holics Podcast Network YouTube channel, and we will give it a couple weeks and we will do a drawing and get another shirt out to somebody else as well. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, send us a screenshot, either the Fantasy Holics page or the Fatboyz Facebook page, and we will do a drawing.
Yeah, make sure you give us a tag in that too. Also, if you guys have any suggestions of something you may want to hear, I know we're looking at getting into our rankings and a few other things. But if you have any suggestions, don't hesitate to reach out to the Fantasy Holics or the Fatboyz Facebook page. Give us your suggestions, guys. We're always listening. We always love, to have interaction with our fans. So any chance or anything you want to hear about, even if it's something, ranking of certain, 5 or 6 players, and it's just a short little thing in there. We'll do our best to get it involved. And like you said, that wraps up today's show. So as always, stay hungry.
Stay hungry and stay fat, my friends.